Yeah, welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We are talking about creating a destination of truth, which is all focused around the corporate website and how people are using it as a central repository of communications, and how in these uncertain times, obviously, it's a kind of a pivotal kind of place to communicate with all different kinds of stakeholders. So the idea behind today's session is it's an informal kind of chance to kind of discuss kind of what the kind of key issues are, maybe some of the challenges you faced, and really start looking at kind of what those solutions are and how we progress through the different phases of this kind of challenging time in terms of communication. So for those that don't know me, I know a lot of you on the call do already, but my name's Dan Cowley. I'm head of digital strategy here at Black Sun, and fundamentally over the next kind of 45 minutes to an hour I'll be taking you through kind of some of our thoughts, and as I say, getting a little bit of opinion based from peers, because I think it's a wonderful opportunity to hear how other people are dealing with this in terms of what we're doing. So today is part of a wider comms piece in terms of what Black Sun are doing to help facilitate and support our clients. We're looking at a number of different challenges in terms of how communication is kind of being led across the different stakeholder groups, and I guess fundamentally thinking about what that new reality looks like. So trying to give you some insights and thinking as to where we're going, the destination of all of this in terms of the comms channels. The piece today is really kind of very simple. We're looking at that in terms of the destination of truth, and we're thinking about where we are and also where we're going. And along the way, there'll be some top tips and hopefully some recommendations. So I imagine, given, there'll be some key takeaways for everyone to kind of work through. There's a number of different roles in terms of people that are registered. So there's investor relations, there's communications, head of communications. So hopefully there'll be something for everyone in terms of what you're doing on your day-to-day kind of comms journey. And I think just to kind of set up in terms of the session itself, everyone's able to chat. So if you want to raise a question or you want to interrupt or just say something, and maybe there's something that springs to mind as I'm going through some of these examples, please feel free to unmute yourselves and have a go. There's no rhyme or reason. It's not raising a hand or pressing anything. You should have facility to just unmute yourself using your computer controls. So hopefully that's clear for everyone, and feel free to jump in, as I say. And what I'll do as we go through, if it's all right with a few of you, is I'll probably pick on a few of you by name, if that's all right, in terms of some experiences that you've been doing most recently in terms of what you're doing in terms of that comms kind of piece. So without further ado, let's kind of take us through kind of what we're looking to achieve today. So I guess really, how do we think about the corporate website and in terms of the communication challenge that we're kind of facing at the moment? And fundamentally, how we see it is working with a communications life cycle. So as I say, it's never been it's never been less important in terms of the fundamental kind of piece around what a website is and how it communicates with the audiences. So fundamentally, how has it helped with crisis communications as a first kind of point of call? Everyone was kind of wondering what was going on. There was lots of uncertainty, and how did it deal with that in terms of communicating those kind of core messages? But also then, as we transition through this in terms of the life cycle, we've got a simplified model here in terms of what you're looking at, and really around those phases of movement. And we've seen seen a lot of change over the last few days, actually, here in the UK around that kind of careful optimism. There's little signs, there's little things that are happening around kind of maybe B&Q opening, and I've seen in the press today around McDonald's. And I know it's all consumer-facing things, but there is a certain level of optimism about what's going to be happening next and how businesses are reflecting on that and how they're going to transition through this in terms of kind of onward. And then we also see that there's a longer term kind of piece around how businesses will kind of reflect on what's been going on, maybe review how they performed, how they supported their staff, how they supported their customers, their clients, and then also then what that new normal looks like. So what does the future kind of hold for everyone in terms of those specific kind of elements? So as we kind of go, we've also then started to look at what that means in terms of each individual facet, and part of today is kind of outlining what that means in terms of each one. So here you've got the steps of crisis comms. So we've kind of, there's that acknowledgement piece as a first kind of point of call, understanding what that is in terms of what the business is going to be doing. But then we saw it transition into maybe companies thinking more around how they could communicate what they're doing as a business, around maybe it's how they're helping people or how they're facilitating kind of what they're doing around it. So again, promoting what the business is doing. Then we saw an expansion on that story. So people were thinking about other stakeholders. It wasn't just a case of, crikey, we've got to get a message to market. And then also how they consolidated that information. So really kind of thinking about how you could bring it all together to make it easy for people to find kind of regular updates, kind of regular kind of communication with all of the different groups as we kind of go through. So I wanted to just take you on a little journey through this in terms of the crisis comms piece. And I've picked out a few kind of examples of kind of where we've seen kind of best practice. So the acknowledgement of the crisis is kind of something that we've seen across all of the FTSE. We did a poll, you may have seen it in some of the communications that have gone out recently, but there was 92% of businesses that had made an acknowledgement in a news article. And often that was led from a CEO point of view. So senior management kind of saying, this is where we are as a business. Maybe it was a kind of a message that was around, personifying calmness and readiness, and the business was kind of appropriately prepared for how it could kind of deal with these kind of elements. And a lot of it was focused around the health of employees and customers being paramount, around unprecedented times and everything else. So that was what was leading the way. And a lot of businesses timed it very well in terms of getting it to market, and used obviously the kind of website in terms of how that would manifest itself. But that was kind of the initial first point of call. Then what we saw was businesses kind of being able to promote themselves. So here's a Burberry example. Now, Burberry had a lot of press coverage in terms of from the likes of the BBC and beyond, because senior members of the ministry started referencing them in terms of who could help them with their kind of PPE kit and different kind of overalls and different things and face masks. And it was a good opportunity to obviously businesses to be saying, okay, well, here's how we're contributing to the fight. Here's what we're doing in terms of whether that be through donations or staff or working from home, and integrating all of that, but really kind of setting out a scene of what the business is doing to contribute that. And again, whether that was charitable donations or whatever, in terms of that kind of element. The next piece was really around expanding the story. And again, this is a really nice example from BP, around in this together. And the whole point here is it's a response timeline. So focusing on what the business is doing, there's a tone of voice around it in terms of, making sure that you're seeing this tremendous change, and we're doing everything we can to bring all of these kind of things together. And there's also kind of a relaxed nature to it. The chief executive introduces it. There's no surname. He's just referenced as Bernard. So again, kind of thinking about how they could talk around the subject and introduce it in a way that was maybe a bit softer, thinking about that tone of voice, calm, personified, ready, and taking action. And actually all the articles that sit in here are all around things like supply chain, customer safety, helping society, whether it be through their helping in terms of intensive care and everything that's going on in terms of the kind of the kit that they're maybe putting in there, and also then supporting kind of local businesses and startups and different things. So there's a huge amount of content here, and what they've done is consolidated it into this kind of timeline. And actually what's really interesting is, whereas a lot of companies have maybe struggled maybe with one or two kind of publications, BP have been the most proactive, I think, of all of the businesses I've seen out there. They've got 37 articles that have been promoted within the last month and since March the 18th. So again, there's the constant narrative there in terms of what they're doing in terms of creating the kind of the core messaging. We've also seen the likes of Britland here with their COVID-19 page. Now, this sits in the governance kind of piece, and it's really focused on that in terms of what they're doing around the people, customers, communities, places, developments, and suppliers. And I think fundamentally it allows them to showcase exactly what the business is doing to articulate um, during this kind of crisis, but also kind of looking forward about what it means in terms of how they're going to help those different kind of areas and the governance obviously that sits behind it. And I think what's interesting here is that they've also supported this with news articles. So they've driven kind of content, and they've driven stakeholders to this content. But what's really interesting is that actually, these updates are probably a couple of weeks old now. And it's interesting that I think now is the time where we're kind of going, okay, well, a lot happens in a 2-week period. Their news articles, the last one on COVID was on the 16th. So again, how can they back this up and make sure that there's a constant stream of communication in terms of what they're looking to do on their site? Beyond what you'd associate with kind of the investor stakeholders or maybe kind of internal kind of employees, GSK have gone a little bit further and started talking directly to job seekers. And I think this is again another interesting kind of piece where they've got all of their kind of main corporate communications around the vaccine and what they're doing with their partnership with Sanofi, and all of that is kind of bubbling away in its own kind of guise. But what they're doing is directly reaching out to people within this in certain times and saying, look, we know that this is happening. We're aware of kind of what it might mean for you in terms of whether you're trying to kind of apply for a job here, and maybe depending on where you are in that kind of transition of communications. But understanding that there is virtual recruitment processes, there's the piece at the bottom which says around don't panic, we're still here, we're still recruiting. So again, it sets out a very kind of clear message at this difficult time as to what to expect as a business. And that is a very much a hand-holding kind of piece and reassuring to kind of audience members as well that they're taking that interest in different stakeholders. So again, expanding the narrative to all kind of stakeholders. And where we've seen kind of the most transition, I guess, in the last week or so is really kind of that the creation and the consolidation of kind of hub information, and really thinking about it in terms of articulating not just news articles, so having separate, disparate kind of communications, but bringing them all together into a hub, around news, views, whether it's content, whether it's insights, whether it's FAQs. Tesco have got a good example. There's lots out there in terms of what people are creating. Often it's just news articles at this stage, but I think as we kind of move forward through those phases that I outlined earlier, we'll see that transitioning to be maybe more kind of insights and kind of helping out kind of the different elements of that kind of life cycle. So I think the next question I wanted to kind of run through is kind of where are we? And I think this comes back to that life cycle in terms of the comms piece. But I think it goes a little bit further in terms of what we're trying to do in terms of who the stakeholders are and how we're communicating with them. So beyond the crisis comms kind of piece, and I would argue that we're starting to go into careful optimism, depending on what the government do over the next week or two. That may be sooner rather than later. But I think that there's definitely that transition. And so what we're trying to do now is start thinking about what, a stakeholder's mindset is. So we've gone through this kind of scared kind of piece where maybe, everyone's unsure, they're overwhelmed, they're not quite kind of sure what's going on because you've got the government updates every night, and it feels like there was some huge decisions being made very, very quickly. To actually kind of going through that phase into maybe they're a bit more relieved, they're ready, they're positive, they're kind of looking for what's going to be happening in terms of how we can transition out of this kind of period of flux. And then as you go through in that reflective element of maybe comparing experiences, maybe there's more of a reflective mood in terms of how the business has performed, through to what that new normal looks like in terms of embracing it and implementing action plans around it, and whether that be in terms of your staffing, in terms of your locations, in terms of what the business structure is. All of that should be kind of thought about in terms of how that communication strategy works. And also then if you start looking at what those kind of key messages are in terms of everyone kind of looking at kind of whether it be thank yous, leadership updates, growth messages. And I think what we're seeing is that people have been focused on that crisis comms, They've been focused on kind of whether it be the CEO, thank yous to staff, and all of that kind of element. And now what we need to start seeing from businesses is kind of using the corporate website to really facilitate how they can then start on that journey in terms of transitioning through those kind of phases. And really start looking at maybe even if it's positive stories, what the businesses have done to change, how they are justifying maybe their actions, and thinking about how you can bring all of those to the fore in terms of whether that's through a hub, whether we've got the technology and the capability of kind of creating kind of those pages quickly and succinctly, but fundamentally allowing us then to kind of transition, as we say, in terms of the comms piece. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, I didn't want to be doing all of the talking today. What I wanted to do is kind of facilitate a little bit of a session in terms of kind of best practice and thought process. And I hope, given what we were seeing earlier in terms of the crisis comms element, it's understanding from you guys, I guess, a little bit around where you are on this kind of journey. And so what would be really useful for me is if you can, and I've put here around introductions, obviously for those that don't know you, you know, your name, your role, your business responsibility, nothing too in depth. I mean, I'd be saying, hi, my name's Dan. I'm head of digital strategy at Black Sun. My responsibility is making sure that everything gets built appropriately. So it's literally that level. Don't worry too much about the kind of minutiae of detail, but really understanding kind of where you are on that journey in terms of the kind of piece around creating a communications hub, whether you've just put out press releases, whether there's still things that need to be kind of decisions that need to be made from a business, whether you're unsure about anything in terms of the kind of the way that that's being kind of communicated, whether it's getting to the right stakeholders through the right channels. And I think one of the interesting pieces there for me is around, have normal communications survived all of this, and have you been able to kind of facilitate your communications calendar as planned, or has it all gone out the window? So I'll leave these on screen for you. And maybe if I can do some picking on people and just unmute yourself as you're kind of talking, but hopefully you won't be offended. Jade, maybe if I can ask you, I know you work Direct Line Group, but maybe if I could ask you to lead the way, would that be okay?
Yes, sure, Dan. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Jade. Really appreciate it. Go for it.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Jade. I am the Senior PR Manager at Direct Line Group, and I'm responsible for media activity, a lot of the PR media stuff, but I also manage the dlg.co.uk website. So what we've done, it was just I think a couple of weeks after things really kicked off. Obviously we're in insurance and there's lots of questions about who's covered with, you know, all these customer queries, or different types of stakeholders as well, investors. So what we wanted to do was we put a note out from our CEO to make a statement about what we were doing. We moved very quickly to get our staff working from home, is over 11,000 people, a lot of frontline people as well. And we just wanted to kind of reassure everyone that we were on it, and reassure people that we were looking after our people, customers, that there was, we'd been thinking about them as well. We were pointing them to the different brands to make sure that they were landing in the right places in order to get their policy information. And that was kind of the first thing we did first. And then we also throughout, I mean, it all worked, it all happened so very quickly. It was also really important for us to relay all of our messages internally first. So what I've been doing is taking a lot of that internal stuff and turning it into content for external purposes as well. So there was some stuff around balancing home working with children, staying healthy amongst, you know, the wake of COVID-19, things like how to make sure you got the right working environment at home. So some useful kind of content, which we thought would be quite helpful for our audience. So that was the next thing we started doing. And then as a group, we've also got a 3.5 million community fund, which we are spreading out to various charities in the different areas up and down the country where we have offices, which has been an amazing source of content for us, because not only does it kind of do a really good job in, showing the Direct Line group is helping the communities that it works in, but it's given us lots of fantastic content for the website as well. And a lot of these charities are quite small, don't have massive marketing departments to work, so they're really grateful for us to put this content in a place where they can then promote it. So from a social perspective, we've been getting quite a lot of traction there as well.
That's good.
Yeah.
And do you think that kind of in terms of where you're going, are you thinking about what communications kind of messages you're looking to kind of convey over the course of the next week or two? I know that sounds great, and obviously you're doing huge amounts of great work out there in the community. Are you going to be leveraging against that? Are you thinking about kind of how the business is reacting, and your point there around kind of the call centers and obviously everyone working from home? Obviously there will be a transitional phase as they all start returning to work. Maybe there's kind of social distancing in the offices. Is that things you're discussing yet?
Not at the moment, Dan. So it just happens to be our Q1 results next Wednesday.
Well, that's the other kind of challenge, isn't it? You've got lots of the day-to-day kind of element to it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm literally living like day by day at the moment. But yeah, so I mean, it's really important what's going to happen over the next week, and a lot of what we'll be communicating will come out in our Q1 results. So I think for now, it's going to be kind of these proactive messages around, the work that we're doing in charities. But as we go on, I can kind of see how perhaps we'll start using case studies a little bit better.
Yeah.
So already there's lots of examples from within the business of, I mean, at the moment it's very much focused around charities and the work we're doing, but actually there's lots of stuff going on from staff who are volunteering, who are helping their local communities, and lots of kind of really good content like that, which we could potentially turn into, video content or something a little bit more kind of interactive.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you, Jade. Really appreciate your input. Sarah, can I be so bold as to ask maybe you the same question? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Keogh. I am the Digital Campaigns Manager at MS Amlin, which is a business-to-broker insurance company. I manage a large amount of kind of our digital marketing, which includes the management of our core corporate website. So I guess we only initially really communicated anything about 6 weeks ago in the form of a press release, which was from memory basically around operational resilience and what we're doing and how we're managing managing our clients and brokers, their expectations and meeting their needs through working remotely. And then we started to develop a COVID information zone, which is just basically a centralized place on our website where we can kind of publish new content as it comes out. We are at a standstill in that respect at the moment. It's kind of bare bones, and there's a lot more that I would like to add to it and build it out in different areas. But given the current situation, and we've got a lot of claims coming in, and we haven't yet determined what our position will be in terms of, paying, for instance, business interruptions claims. So there's a bit of friction in the PR space, which some of you might be familiar with, and now we've kind of been brought into it. So until we kind of figure out what our kind of go-to-market position is, we're not really going to be adding a whole lot more at the moment, and there is a bit of resistance from people to even talk about things like financial security and capital strength at the moment, which is something that's important to remind our brokers and clients of. But yeah, so it's a little bit of a funny time on which trying to kind of, as I said, figure out what our position is and get buy-in from our parent company and across the business. But ideally, I would like to promote what we're doing in terms of contributing to our communities. So we've got a new charity fund that I'd like to talk about. We're also developing a volunteering scheme for our employees as well, which I think would be good content to kind of promote through the website. But again, given what's happened over the last couple of weeks, there's resistance to do so.
Well, I think you guys reacted quickly in terms of creating that hub, and I think part of that is a nice kind of feature of kind of when it was last updated. Obviously, the kind of the nuance of how the business is now reacting is obviously something that we'll have to monitor. But I think having that central repository was a real kind of key asset for you guys, especially given the reach across Europe, and obviously you were working with different jurisdictions. So whatever the government's saying in Holland is going to be different to the UK, and you're dealing with that as a business. So I think it was a real opportune kind of way of kind of meeting those challenges.
Yeah, and I think that it's going well. I mean, I think now it's our 20th most visited page on the website, and it does appear that people are engaging with the content. Very little content, admittedly, but there is currently. But other than that, we're far more active in kind of the social space, which I've less to do with. But I think we've been pushing out LinkedIn posts, not only directing you back to the information zone, but also with messages from senior leadership. As some of you may know, we're actually the one brand, but we are made of 4 legal entities, so we have 4 CEOs.
Let's just add to the complexity.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to promote and repurpose kind of those videos, which I thought was a really nice thing to do on the website, but just a matter of figuring out how we do that.
So I guess to summarize kind of where you and Jade have been is that kind of crisis element. So it's dealing with things as they're coming in. It's dealing with a changing kind of ethos in terms of what a business is, and obviously then trying to facilitate that in terms of coherent communications for your stakeholders. Would that be about right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that's what we'd expect to see. I mean, it's and thank you, sir. I really appreciate your input today. I think it's understanding kind of how that manifests itself and how you can bring that to life. And I think what we've seen from those examples you've seen and how we've kind of worked out where the businesses are, it's really understanding that a best practice approach is by being proactive. It's about understanding what the stakeholders are requiring. It's having a consolidated approach as a business, so you're not kind of giving kind of separate messages in different guises. And I think Sarah was just kind of alluding to it at the end there, but thinking about how you can kind of enhance that through rich media and bring it to life, and kind of I guess kind of thinking about how you can use things like video to really kind of approach it from a personal level, in terms of what people are looking for. I had taken the liberty of creating a few slides just in case people wanted to or weren't keen on talking, because I was going to be talking around it. And funnily enough, I chose Direct Line and Emma Samlin. So apologies, guys. I'd already preempted kind of getting you guys involved. So thank you for your time. I've also got Antofagasta here. Have I got Andre on the call? May have dropped off. No worries if that's the case. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, and I guess the kind of the next phase of where we are going, in terms of those kind of pieces, and I think starting to allude to it in terms of the careful optimism phase, and really thinking about what that kind of brings. And Sarah again was talking around how the business is changing, and obviously there's certain nuances, but we've been talking with mining organizations, insurers, whether it be plumbing and heating specialists, whatever your kind of nuance of business is, understanding that actually you need to start thinking about a coherent kind of mindset is probably something that we need to start transitioning towards, so that we're not as reactive and we're maybe a little bit more proactive. So what we've started to do is kind of break down maybe some areas of kind of where the business can start thinking about those stories. So if you were to have a comms calendar and you were to have kind of a period of say the next 3 months, what does that look like? Now we don't know when those phases will be, because they'll obviously differ, and they'll differ around the world in terms of what kind of the recommendations are. But if you were to think about careful optimism, what would that manifest itself to be? And I think we've taken a stab at a few things here. So, celebrating positivity, whether it be the fact that the stores are reopening, or, people are going back to the office, or whatever that might be. Thinking about what the business role is within those next steps. And again, what the business is doing to facilitate that. And understanding what maybe CEOs kind of on boards are doing to really kind of help with governance around it. What businesses are doing to help our people, and Jade was alluding to it earlier in terms of the kind of working from home and then working in call centers and beyond in terms of the work that they do. But again, how are you helping your people not just work but actually live, and whether that be through kind of helping in local communities and helping kind of fund things that maybe have kind of taken a bit of a hit, whatever you're doing around that to help those people. And again, Jade was talking about a charitable fund there. But also then looking forward, so what does the next few months look like for a business? And the impact on whether it be sales and revenues and everything else is quite clear, but also what is the business kind of trying to do to maybe transition out of that, and thinking about planning around the rest of the year. And interestingly, you look at some of the organizations that have made those communication challenges in terms of things around, I showed you the Britland example, but they're putting on hold things like dividends, they're putting on hold things like maybe AGMs and going to virtual kind of approaches. But again, there's a looking forward that needs to be happening, saying, okay, well, this is what's going to be happening later in the year. And Jade's example of results in a week or so's time is a prime example of actually starting to look forward in terms of what that kind of manifests itself to be. We've also taken a look at the review and reflect phase, and again, maybe that might be these things, and we'll monitor this as we kind of go forward. But thinking about maybe how the website can transition in terms of management reviews, whether it be audits of what you've kind of done, thinking about that forward thinking kind of approach and really kind of that thought leadership. Positive stories around what's happening within industry. And I think, whether it be customer client changes, what that means. I mean, seen in the press again that, people are shopping differently. Will people go back to the way things were? Excuse me. And understanding what that means for you as a business, in terms of everything that's going to be happening. I think the kind of the other element here is the new normal. And again, I don't know when that would be happening in terms of timings, but there will be a period where people are getting used to what that looks like. Businesses may be looking back and saying, whether it's a year in review or a video of kind of the crisis and what they did and how they helped and all of that. So there may be some sort of looking back and kind of celebrating that in terms of how the business has thrived or developed or changed, or whatever that may be. Showcasing those changes, and again, whether that's infographics or kind of fact sheets or whatever, but kind of thinking about how you can showcase how the business has rolled with the punches and kind of come out the other side. Focusing on recruitment, and again, that forward-looking element. GSK, you've seen earlier, are already starting to do that, but I think a lot of businesses will have put things like recruitment on hold for a short period of time. But there will be a period where people will then need to kind of get back to where they were, and whether those are businesses that maybe have kind of a large kind of disparate workforce, or whether it's a centralized kind of specialty, there will be an area where people start looking at where they need to get to in terms of that kind of element, and then consolidating all of that information. So again, we've seen those COVID hubs kind of springing up, but thinking about what the longer term destination is in terms of maybe where people put that information. In a year's time, will it be appropriate to have a COVID page, or would it just be part of your news? And thinking about how you can best kind of communicate all of those kind of key messages in terms of that consolidation piece. I've got another few questions on this one. So hopefully all of that makes sense in terms of what we're seeing and how the communication life cycle works. And what I wanted to do is kind of maybe talk to a few of you around kind of what your plans are. So beyond today and what's happened over the last few weeks, as a business, what are you looking forward to in terms of those next phases? And has there any discussions around things like virtual AGMs? I know we've done a number of kind of conversations with our clients around how they can best do that, whether it's through audio kind of webinars such as this, thinking about results, in Jay's example, and then also kind of business contingency plans and next steps kind of in the future. And I think it'd be really useful for us just to understand kind of where your businesses are in terms of that. Nick, can I be so bold as to maybe ask yourself, Nick Jones from Arrow Group, whether you maybe could take a few of these questions for me?
Yeah, that's fine, Dan, no problem.
Thank you, Nick, appreciate it.
I mean, just to quickly put, most of you probably haven't heard of Arrow Group. I mean, we're an integrated asset management business operating across 6 countries in Europe. We're a B2B to C brand, so you probably won't have heard of us. So we haven't got a big consumer presence. And that has driven our communications response. So from an external perspective, we've been quite quiet. We've done a little bit of LinkedIn activity, which is mainly focused on employees. We've had some messages of forbearance on our consumer-facing websites, which is a consistent message across all of our different brands. But I would say 95% of all the activity that we've been doing has been internal focus. So I was having a look the other day, and I think we've done about 38 dedicated messages, COVID-19 messages, to our employees, which have been a mixture. And we've tried to categorize our response into 3 kind of phases. The first being to protect, which was protecting our people, but also making sure that we have continuity of service for our clients and our customers. The second kind of main phase was that, we have to keep cash coming through the front door. So we've been very, very focused on making sure that we have a collect message, but based on forbearance and compassion. And then the third phase, which is kind of where we're moving into now, is the kind of the prepare for the future phase, the new normal that you've been speaking about, Dan. So, and that's been a combination of, lots of authentic messages from our leadership team, lots of video, which we've been posting on our social media internal platform, which is the Workplace Facebook platform. So, literally, every other day there's been some form of, leadership message, thanking people for their efforts and, reassuring people and making sure that they stay focused on the key priorities which we've identified to get us through this crisis. So huge amount of work, but mostly all internal focused. Just in terms of the questions you've got there, the next phases are, it's really around preparing for the new normal. So we'll have a note going out tomorrow, which is about the transition back into the workplace from our Chief People Officer. And we're taking the view that governments may invite people back to work, but we're not going to rush back into work, and we're going to actually try and learn and benefit from the advantages of some remote working. So to try and capture the benefits of what we've all experienced over the past 6 or 7 weeks, because it's not all been negative. Working from home actually has some big employee value proposition benefits. It's very much kind of about planning for the future, getting people back to work, but in a very considered and almost a patient way. In terms of AGMs, that's difficult. So obviously we can't do that in the normal way. So we're going to do audio, and we will probably have just 2 of the directors in the head office. I think
suitably apart, I presume.
Suitably apart. I mean, I think as a minimum you need to have 2. So we will have 2, and they will be kept apart. And we will probably do a managed audio call with a facilitator. In terms of Q1, which we've got in a couple of weeks, obviously Q1 is not such a big deal, but again, we'll do it from an audio perspective. It's interesting, our full year results happened on the 12th of March, which was obviously just before this crisis really started to catch hold. And we were going to do our results at JPM until they told us within about 12 hours notice that their office was going to be shut. So we had to move all the webcasting kit,
Wow.
The day before, test it all, and do it from our head office to an audience of 0. So, webcasting is certainly something that we're looking at for half year as well, because we still don't know, what the plans are. And in terms of kind of next steps, it really is getting people back to work, but in a way that is safe for them and that we retain the benefits that we've that we've seen over the past sort of 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate it. I think just if I can ask you maybe one query, it's a kind of like your focus has been internal. So it's really about kind of making sure that your people are okay. Because I think you see something like a BP where they've got the same number, you know, you were saying 38, they said 37 kind of announcements, and they're all public facing. Your obviously priority is really your people. And I think that's a really interesting angle that obviously people from outside your organization simply wouldn't know that you're using all of those great things. So I think is there a conscious kind of focus on that as opposed to external comms?
Yeah, I mean, I say we're not a big consumer brand. You know, we've been doing client communication, so there's a lot of one-to-one conversations going on with clients and limited partners. So, so we haven't had a need to do a lot of external stuff. You know, we've externalized some of the internal stuff where it's been useful to do so, but it hasn't been a big driver of our comms strategy. You know, really, it's about our people, and if we look after our people and keep them safe, then they can look after our customers, who in turn make sure we look after our clients. So that's really been the focus, and it will continue to be the focus. Any operational news has got to go through the usual, you know, market disclosure. So we will be updating the markets and shareholders in terms of operational performance at Q1 shortly. So yeah, it's been a deliberate strategy to focus on the internal audience.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Nick. Opening up the floor, because I feel like I'm picking on everybody. So has anybody else got any kind of views on this in terms of where they're going in terms of organisation? Feel free, if you've already spoken, feel free to jump in again. There's no problems there. There's always that quiet moment when nobody unmutes, which is fine.
Yes, it's Richard here from Black Sun.
Hi,
and I think what's been quite interesting to me is how the communications really have been quite stakeholder centric. And what I mean by that is whichever particular audience companies are communicating with, they have made a lot of effort to make sure that they cover each of the other stakeholder groups. And I think that's something that Jade referenced in her very first example. So even talking to customers, you know, people are talking about what they're doing with their employees and society as a whole. So I think it's really reinforced the need for that broader engagement across audiences. And also I think it's just really reinforced how important the corporate website is to provide that hub of content. And I'm sure that will continue to evolve as we go through the crisis.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, and I think that evolution is something we've seen in terms of people obviously not having a huge amount of time to deal with these challenges and these communication kind of pieces, and working out how they can facilitate that in a way that's coherent and structured, and obviously then needing the kind of technology that sits behind it to back that up. Okay, just going through, this was my example slide in case nobody was talking around that, so thank you again, Nick, for kind of going through it. That was perfect. Before we kind of just go out to any kind of further questions or anything, I just wanted to kind of share a few top tips of what we're seeing. And I think Rich did a great job there of kind of focusing it on terms of stakeholders. And I think we've pulled out, you know, a top 5, 6 in terms of, you know, what we're looking at in terms of all of those different kind of challenges. We'll circulate the presentation after the event so you can have a look at that life cycle and think maybe a little bit more around kind of that strategic kind of thinking of where you want to be in terms of the comms channels. But I think, you know, where we're seeing it is focusing on clear, articulate communications first and foremost, not rushing things, and again thinking about kind of what you're saying and how you're saying it. Don't overstretch, and develop your own channels the way you feel it's appropriate. And Nick's a perfect example of that, of saying, look, you know, we as a business are focusing internally. That's what we're doing. And again, whether you want to create hubs or we want to just put out a couple of press releases, wherever you feel it's appropriate. But I think about what the stakeholders need. Think about those messages that we are aligned to, and also think about what people's mindset is. And I think that's a real key for that one in terms of understanding, you know, where they want you to be as a business, whether it's through reassurance, whether it's through proactivity, whatever it is, in terms of that kind of core message. Thinking about tone of voice, it's one thing obviously in terms of being very time poor with all of these things to obviously get things to market as soon as possible. But I think, you know, you saw from the BP example that they're using a very soft approach with the kind of not even using surnames in the CEO's intro. But again, you know, thinking about maybe simplicity, honesty, transparency around everything that you're saying, so that people actually feel empathy in terms of the core messages, and thinking about that tone of voice in terms of what you're saying. Planning ahead, so think about those upcoming phases. We've kind of gone through this crisis comms period, and I think as we now start to look out the other side, it's really about thinking about where we want to be as a business, in terms of those kind of conversations that are happening, and be part of that conversation. Be proactive, servicing stakeholder requirements, and really fundamentally being the charge, as it were, in terms of what people are looking for, and don't shy away from it in terms of whether that be through social media, or whether it's through your corporate website. But think about how you can actually engage your audiences, and even if it is something like, Sarah, you were talking around, the business is still kind of uncertain of where they're going to be ending up, there may be things that you can do to just make sure that people are aware that that's a process that you're running to. So thinking about whether it's little steps that you can do along the way in terms of that communication piece. And finally, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think, fundamentally, we've seen kind of the examples today mean that every business is going through different challenges. They're approaching it in different ways. And I think what's really interesting for us is that, if there is things that we can keep, listening and learning to in terms of the market, we've got our internal research team that kind of, keep their ear to the ground in terms of what's happening out there, and are looking for examples the whole time. And fundamentally, we're helping our clients develop communication strategy that align with all of the things you've seen here today in terms of that life cycle, and so driving forward in terms of how we can manufacture that through things like the corporate website and beyond. Guys, has anybody got any kind of queries or questions at this stage?
Just one observation, Dan. I think
Please.
I think the crisis, what it's shown the comms team in Arrow, is that it's supercharged the ex-com team in terms of their willingness to embrace new media. If someone had told me my CEO would get up in the morning and record a video on his phone and post it onto a social media platform, then I would have said I doubt it. But these guys are doing videos, recording them themselves, posting them themselves. They're not being edited. They're just kind of they're very authentic. They're very real, and they're very genuine, and they're really resonating with our people. And I think that's been a really fantastic development from a comms perspective over the past sort of 6 weeks. And that could have taken years, but it's as with every disaster or an emergency, some good stuff comes out of it. So I think it's been quite insightful to watch that happen very quickly over the past few weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I think that pace of change has taken everyone by surprise in terms of facilitation of workforces, and also how people are embracing new technology, not least from the fact that I'm talking to you today from my spare room. So, it's all part of that new normal. And I think you're right. It's actually kind of thinking about that authenticity of messages is a kind of fundamental. And again, using the technology that is available, and things like the corporate website allow us to do that far easier in terms of posting videos and everything else. So yeah, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate your input. The final thing from me is just to remind you guys that we have a series of these. So we're looking at how we can help a number of different stakeholders. It's not all about, obviously, the corporate website. And there's beyond this in terms of investor audiences and thinking about kind of senior management videos and audio webcasts and different things. There's also things on social media and kind of leadership and everything else. So if you've got any queries or questions, feel free to drop us a line. And obviously you'll have received notification of the other seminars and webinars over the course of the next few days, and feel free to join us for all of those. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. Really do appreciate you kind of taking the time out to join us. Hopefully I've answered some key questions and given you some key takeaways in terms of what you can be doing kind of going forward. And if you've got any queries or questions, do feel free to email me later in terms of whatever those might be. So thank you for today.